It restricts my breathing through my nose.
Most of my epics have come from something to do with a headlamp. And so we're gonna send these 19 headlamps over to Torque Test Channel, who is gonna do the testing that we can't, and they're gonna send them back so we can finish the testing that we can. Because I really wanna understand about these headlamps, because if they go out, you're either gonna have a bad trip or die.
Yeah, big thanks to Ryan for hitting us up. We're the Torque Test Channel. We independently purchase and test a lot of tools, power tools. Sometimes we make Frankenstein-like bad ideas in the name of science, but we've also bought and tested over 150 flashlights, more recently using this integrating sphere, the only way you can really inject some truth serum into lights when it comes to lumens. We convinced a car headlight testing company to make this device for flashlights, and it spits out things like lumens, which is total light output, and Candela, which measures how spot focused or intense a small area of light is from a device, and that also tells you its range in meters. We usually mix in less legitimate brands within our own episodes, so this was a lot of spot-on advertising, but there were a few lights that either play games with the ANSI FL1 standard used to advertise lumens, like the Nightcore HC60, or ones that are just incredibly hard to ever experience their peak light output, like the Petzl Swift RL, whose sensor needs to be so blocked and blacked out to do as advertised that even covering it with your finger still won't be dark enough for it to go fully into high.
Thank you, Torque Test Channel, for testing all of these headlamps. We are going to go into all of their data in a minute and also look at our burn rate tests, which didn't always line up with what the manufacturer said. Shocker, I know. But we even tested the weights of these things, and those were way off.
But do those help you see better?
Not when you're wearing all of them. I can't see shit right now.
Now, the headlamps we're testing are anywhere from 300 lumens to 2,700 lumens, but there are flashlights on Amazon for under 20 bucks that are 100,000 lumens. Now, the Torque Test Channel loves to poke fun at these large exaggerations because they literally cannot be true. And in order to understand what 100,000 lumens was, I went to another source that's only slightly more accurate than an Amazon listing. 65 to 70 car headlights combined, a small stadium floodlight, if aimed correctly, could light up an entire football field sized area. A real 100,000 lumen light requires dozens of high power LEDs, hundreds of watts and serious heat dissipation. A real 100,000 lumen flashlight is not a toy. Direct eye exposure can cause temporary or permanent blindness.
To combat all of this exaggeration, there is the ANSI FL1 standard, which was spearheaded by Plato. All of the brands that we tested are members of Plato.
They're all trying to play in the same zip code of how something is measured. One of the things is that they measure lumens, or total light output, at 30 seconds. Not the first 2-second burst when you first turn it on, which if you kept it there, would overheat your headlamp. And so a more useful number, something you can compare headlamp to headlamp, is if you did it at the 30-second mark.
In about 30 seconds, we'll dive into those results, but first let's talk about weight.
I was just trying to collect the different weights of these headlamps. And damn it, Black Diamond had one where the two weights, their headlamp and batteries, as if I need that separated, didn't add up to their tech spec sheet combined. And then another one it did, but a different headlamp from Phoenix didn't count the batteries? No, wait, it did. Oh, no, wait, it didn't. And then another one counted it without the strap, as if I care about that when I'm comparing one headlamp to another. Now, after I collected all this data, we weighed them ourselves. We did it with 2 scales. We weighed things we knew what the thing weighed. We know it's super close enough. Some of these headlamps are way off. Some are under and some are over. The Astro 300 literally was over the PDF's weight and under the website's weight. But then on the other one, where the PDF is 92 grams and correct, spot on, the website says 140.
But kudos to Petzl, whose measurements were all within a few grams of our measurements.
Now, 5 of Phoenix's headlamps pretty much matched what we got, except there was one that they didn't give you the weight with the battery, which is hard to compare even their own headlamps to this headlamp. Now, they did give you something helpful where they compared the weight of it to an egg. Now, what's helpful about comparing it to an egg is I know what that feels like on my forehead. And so, therefore, I can understand how heavy this headlamp would be, of course, without batteries.
They're both equally effective as a lighting source.
No, this is an okay headlamp, no?
Without a battery, it's just as effective as that.
Can't argue with that. If you're going to give us an unhelpful weight, please be right. We got 87 grams instead of 97 grams. And if we went with the bandless headlamp, my favorite kind, we got 54 grams, which is similar to an egg, 52.
In a usable setup, it's 136 grams.
But what I'm finding, like with eggs, that the weights are kind of all over the place. Now, if the weights are all over the place, can we trust the reported lumens? I hope so. There's a standard. Now, what Torque Test Channel tested shows that you can most of the time. In fact, sometimes it's even higher. There's one that's 123% and another one that's 138% higher. However, there were some that were 78 and 77% of what we should be expecting, and that's not across an entire brand. For example, Phoenix has some that were at 100 or above 100% of what we'd expect, but then they had two that were much lower than I think it should have been. Even Petzl had one that was lower than it should have been. What that might be is because it's hard to get it in turbo high mode and or keep it there. Either the settings are hard to understand, or like Petzl's reflective lighting one, where it has a mind of its own, that Torque Test Channel was trying to cover up the sensor so it wouldn't dim itself. Now you can only get so deep into a headlamp episode before you start talking about the batteries. We tested alkaline and lithium, and they come in different sizes. And that is where most of your weight comes from. Now lithium does give you better performance, and it's going to be for lumens and meters or runtime. It doesn't seem to be for both. Now you'll see in our lumen reported section that you'll have 300 and 300 lumens for both battery types, or 450 and 450. But then Petzl has some that you actually get quite a few more lumens if you do use lithium. And not to jump ahead here, but we'd get the same meters regardless of the battery. It's the runtime that would be different. But if you did get higher specs for your lithium battery, your runtime would actually be the same. I found that to be very interesting. So how do they even measure distance? Well, if you get the flashlight on Amazon, you can spotlight threats up to 3,000 meters away. Just so we understand how stupid that is, El Capitan is 1,000 meters high, and you cannot see climbers at the very top of it. On our last high line, that was longer than 3 kilometers, weird sentence. Once they're about halfway out, you can't see them in the daytime. So unless the threat is holding this, you're not going to see shit 3,000 meters away in the dark. So to measure this according to the standard, they use a lux meter, and they are able to measure how much light they're getting in a specific spot, and they do math to math out how many meters that is going to give you usable light. And usable light to them is 0.25 lux, which is a full moon. So like barely usable. So you can see Torque Test Channel's Candela numbers and then how it's mathed into meters. So 4 of Black Diamond's headlamps were higher in Torque Test Channel's tests. One was quite a bit lower and one was right on the money. Out of 6 of Phoenix's headlamps, 2 were higher, 1 was spot on, and 3 were lower. Looks like the 1 night core headlamp we tested was spot on. Out of 7 headlamps tested for Petzl, 1 was lower than theoretical spot mode, but the rest were at or above the reported distance. Now it's the runtime or the burn rate. How long does it go when it's in max mode versus low mode? And that's what we tested for 5 straight days. We even repeated it again for a solid day in order to understand it a little bit better, because when we were done, we were actually more confused. Now, before I show you the details of that, let me show you the oversimplified version of how a headlamp's journey goes.
On pretty bright until it dies is kind of my favorite one. I don't want the headlamp just having a mind of its own. If I want it on, leave it on. Just like the Epic you're on, it gets worse over time. And there's another path that's awesome until the 31st second, and then it drops to actually the usable light for longer than the orange one, but that's because it's trying to prevent it from overheating. If it can't manage that, then it's going to drop it down to the safe zone to be a little bit longer for you. But if you try to turn it back up, it's going to keep dropping back down. So that's kind of what is trying to be portrayed by those numbers.
So we turned on all the headlamps in their highest mode, but you'll notice that some don't stay there. We don't know how to get them to stay there. We were not expecting
some of them to last 5 days. And blowing my mind, it was the AAAs. Now, there are more benefits to lithium-ion batteries. I'm gonna start using them more, besides the more eco-friendliness about them. But those things basically dimmed down to the lowest setting that was usable, just enough so you can see the despair in your partner's eyes as you're both screwed. But those BD headlamps did last the longest, technically. Oddly enough, I'm going to celebrate the one that went out first because it stayed on in high mode the longest, which is what I prefer. If I want it on, I'll leave it on high. I know I'm burning up my battery. So you can see all the collected data for the burn rates for the highest mode and the lowest setting. And you'll notice that none of our numbers actually lined up when we just turned the damn things on. And so it's actually really confusing on how to portray this information. And I think that by itself is interesting, that they all do different things. Now you'll notice some of them, you can watch them slowly dim over time. Other ones were just super bright until they weren't on anymore. And then the other ones dropped down fairly quickly and stayed on for quite a long time. I just feel like it was apples to apples to just turn the damn things on and watch what happens. But man, for having an FL1 rating, this just really hard to know which headlamp does what. I think the most important takeaway here is that you just understand the headlamp you got. Now, try to use this spreadsheet that we'll make available on our website. You can use this information we got to help like steer what you're able to get out of the headlamps you're looking at, but try to guess what's important to you and then try to get that one. But at the end, when you finally have a headlamp, understand how long it will last. Whether you take you should always have a spare. Burn the crap out of one of them, right? Turn it all the way up and just see what happens when you're out and about. Or run it all night with time lapse on your phone. There's very easy ways to see what your headlamp will do without a brake test machine. Now I'm preaching to myself because we have pulled all-nighters on LCAP, 0 sleep, because somebody didn't bring fresh headlamps and I'm impressed. They aid climbed an entire pitch completely in the dark. Once, my toes were over the edge at the top because I didn't have my headlamp on. I didn't realize I was at the edge of El Cap. And if you're a caver with a headlamp epic, put that in the comments below. They all seem to have them. It's very important to have good light. Most epics come from not enough water, not enough light, or not having a walkie-talkie. Amberson off at hownoto.com. I hoped this shined some light on this topic for you. I know we had to gloss over, we bit off too much for this episode, and so we glossed over a lot of like details. So if you are a flashlight nerd, please leave comments below, educate us. We will read them and we will make the next episode better and a lot more narrow. But if you want to see another episode where I learned that a 50% battery means you're almost dead, you could go check out our Rocky Talkie episode next.
Today, we are going to test the Rocky Talkie. Rock!